Hi, this is Mr. Mike for the Mechanicsburg Learning Center with our episode 62 of Mr. Mike's Dino-A-Day. Just checking out some really cool dinosaur super balls. You pull one out and, oh, look at that, isn't that cool? You know, all sorts of crazy dinosaurs that they have encased in a super bouncy elastic, so you can play with your dinosaurs and bounce them high in the air. And what's this? This one's interesting. Let's take a look at this one. Oh, why don't we do today's episode about this particular animal? What makes it unique? We'll take a look at it closely. Has a very, very tall back sail. Can't really tell by the head what it looks like up close, even with our magnifying glass. It's really hard to see. Well, at any rate, this animal is known as Dimetrodon. So it's in a bowl full of dinosaur super balls, okay? And that's basically where the comparison to dinosaurs begins and ends. You've seen the animal displayed in toy stores with all the dinosaurs. You see it in movies, the old movies about dinosaurs, because it was a very distinctive looking animal with that tall sail on its back. However, let me rock your world. It was not the dinosaur. In fact, it came about long time before dinosaurs, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 million years before the dinosaurs. This animal roamed the earth, and it was mostly the beginning remains were found when we first started discovering Dimetrodon. We found it in Texas, and that was in the 1870s. And since then, we've actually found it in Germany also. So this animal got around. We mentioned the other day about when you have a particular genus of animal, in this case Dimetrodon, and then it has a species name beneath it. And depending on how many different variations of the animal, that depends on how many different species names you might give it. So in this case, this had a lot of species names. This has at any given moment somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen different species names. So they're all varying sizes, slightly different in terms of physiology, but they're all under the umbrella of Dimetrodon. So let's get to it. Dimetrodon means two measured teeth. Why would we name an animal two measured teeth? Well, what made Dimetrodon a little exceptional from other animals is basically when you look at the skeleton of an animal, you see the skull of the animal, and it may have all sharp teeth. Like T-Rex had very sharp banana-sized teeth, a mouth full of them. And then other ones had short molar-like teeth that were meant to grind food. Okay, and it had a mouthful of those. Well, Dimetrodon, two measured teeth, it had two different kinds of teeth. Actually, we think probably maybe even three, but it had very sharp ones in the front, and then it had smaller ones in the back, so it could attack prey, grab the prey and hold it, and then chew it up. So two measured teeth is how it's got its name. And we've said when you look at the animal, it's a shame that they, not a shame, but it's kind of interesting that they chose to name it after the teeth rather than the obvious thing when you look at the animal. Here's a nice little model. When you look at the thing, immediately what jumps to mind and what comes to the fore is its sail. There's Dimetrodon with its mouth agape, ready to go after prey in kind of a sprawling stance out like this, not with its legs underneath it, which makes it a little bit different from your typical dinosaur also. So here's Dimetrodon. Some models of the animal are quite interesting and quite detailed. Some have amazing detail. Some models have articulated mouths. Let me show you that. Dimetrodon, let's open up and show folks your teeth. There we go. So right there you can see the different kinds of teeth. The longer ones in the front, the sharp teeth for grabbing and stabbing, and the ones in the back for grinding. So yeah, so you have models that are extremely detailed, expertly painted, and then you have other ones. So yeah, talk about one extreme to the other. Now, granted, this is more for kids, but more and more kids are getting into the more detailed stuff. They want to see what it really looked like. So there you have two different versions of Dimetrodon. But the one thing that is pretty clear, that the most distinctive thing about this is the sail. So let's talk about that sail for a second. The animal itself was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 15 feet long, so it wasn't huge. But the reason there's such a great difference in size from 6 feet, which is about my height, in terms of its length, versus 15 feet, over twice the length, is because of the different kind of species under Dimetrodon. Some were big, some were small, some were only like 2-3 feet long, while others up to 15, maybe even 16 feet long. So the sail on its back depends on how big the animal was, each species. This one probably about 3 feet tall. This one was probably about 11 feet long, the Dimetrodon. So quadrupedal, didn't get up on its hind legs. It spent all of its time on all fours. Sometimes it's shown in the sprawling, almost Komodo dragon-like movement, or a small salamander. But we do think that it could stretch the legs out a little bit and raise itself from a sprawling stance like this, could draw its legs in a little bit and move about a little bit faster to catch prey. You see crocodiles, they have, you don't want to walk by a crocodile and assume it's some slow-moving behemoth. It could move pretty quickly when it wanted to. It wasn't a marathon runner. It was a sprinter, so it would shoot out. So we think Dimetrodon probably did that too. So it is not classified as a dinosaur. It is actually a more mammal-like reptile. So we think it gave birth to babies. Instead of laying eggs like humans do, we give birth to babies. We don't lay eggs, at least last time I checked. So it's not a dinosaur. It is a Palocosaur or a synapsid. Those are two different terms that they use to describe it. The front of the skull flattened, but the overall shape of the skull was curved. Makes it different. In fact, there's an animal related to it called Sgrignoli, and that looked remarkably like the Dimetrodon, but it had no sail at all. So in terms of the sail, I mentioned this earlier, we're going to talk about it. The sail probably had different purposes. The first thing, when it was described in 1878 by a famed paleontologist from Philadelphia, Edward Drinker Cope, he noted the sail and said that it was probably for thermoregulation, meaning it would help the animal regulate its body temperature. If you have a sail like this, all right, and you are cold, you turn your sail towards the sun. The sun beats down on the sail because it has blood vessels throughout, and the blood that is traveling through the sail gets warmed up and then is eventually distributed throughout the body, and that's how the animal would warm itself. And likewise, if it were too hot, it would turn its sail away from the sun or get into the shade and allow the sail, the exposed blood vessels, to cool off and then send the cool blood throughout the body. So that's a theory. However, we've discovered some larger Dimetrodons, and not even just Dimetrodons, other animals with sails, but some larger animals you would think would need better thermoregulation, and they had smaller sails. And then you had smaller animals with bigger sails. So that kind of refutes one of the theories about why the thing had such a sail, to regulate its body temperature. I mean, when you see a gator or a crocodile basking on the side a riverbank, that's what it's doing. It's warming its body. The sun is beating down on it, and it is warming its body, and therefore warming the blood, and it's it can go about its day because now its blood is warmed up and it's not so lethargic because it has cold blood. It's warmed up and it's ready to roll, ready to go after some lunch. So Dimetrodon, discovered in the 1870s in Texas, sent the bones to Edward Rinker Cope, and he names it in 1878. However, he gave it right off the bat 3 different species. He came up with Dimetrodon, but then he named it Dimetrodon incisivus, Dimetrodon rectiformis, and Dimetrodon gigas. So right off the bat, he gave it 3 species because he saw some differences in some of the bones that were recovered. In fact, a year before he named it Dimetrodon, he'd named an animal Clepsydrops, and it turned out to be the same bones as Dimetrodon. Now, Edward Rinker Cope was in the midst of his battle to become the preeminent paleontologist of his day against Othniel Charles Marsh from Yale University and the Peabody Museum. So Marsh and Cope in the famous Bone Wars were constantly trying to outdiscover each other, and in their haste sometimes they made little mistakes. Cope was known to get a set of bones and have them literally analyzed and described within a couple of weeks. I mean, and now we know that things don't move along that quickly. You need to do your research. You need to compare it to other animals, write the paper, submit it, and this can take time. It can take years. Back then, they moved quickly because I want to be the #1 paleontologist, so things like that happen. So this animal, Dimetrodon, walked around 40 to 50 million years before dinosaurs did. We believe there is such a thing as sexual dimorphism in the organism, which means some of the males were probably larger than the females. Some of the scales on the male scales, were larger than what may be on a female. The bones of the male were larger, and that's not always the case. Like in an amphibian, it's hard to tell the male from the female sometimes. Maybe the color might be different, but they might look exactly the same. But sexual dimorphism means that there are characteristics that are unique to the male and unique to the female in the same species. Strangely enough, when they first started, your first paleo artist, the person that draws the animal, not the dinosaur in this case, but draws the animal, the early drawings of Dimetrodon showed a very, very stubby little tail. Why would they draw a stubby little tail in this animal? Because obviously, in models like this, and even the very simplified green one we have here, show a pretty decent sized tail. Well, it was very simple. The early specimens really had no tail at all, so they didn't know it had a long tail. So as, I believe it was 1927, rolls around, and a discovery was made in Texas that showed Dimetrodon having a long tail, and ever since then, all the Dimetrodon drawings and models have a long tail. So there you go. So finally, we always show it in this sprawling stance. You see how the legs are out to the side, even in the easy little green guy here, and even in this tiny one here. I mean, the mistakes were made because here you have a bag of dinosaurs, okay? And as you go through your bag of dinosaurs when you get them at the store, oh, aren't these cool? Here's a T-Rex, here's a, well, that's not a dinosaur, that's a pterosaur. But at any rate, you go through the bag of dinosaurs, and in that bag, you find all sorts of cool little beasts. And, oh, here's one, look at that. Oh, look at that, Mommy, I found a dinosaur. And, of course, we know that that is Dimetrodon, and it's not a dinosaur at all. It's a synapsid. Okay, so, but that's how things like this happen. And the public doesn't really recognize the difference between a dinosaur and a palocosaur or a synapsid. But now you guys know. So the next time you see one in a movie, you can say, that's not a dinosaur, that is a synapsid. Okay, and that's Dimetrodon, and it's clearly more mammalian than it is reptile. So there you go. So, talking about the fact it walked, like this, they do think now that it probably could raise up on and do what they would call, raise up on its legs and call it a high walk. And as I explained earlier, that maybe helped it to chase down some of these animals because it made it a little faster and easier to get around. So, from Dinorific Poetry, Volume 1, written by Mr. Mike, illustrated by my son Ethan, we're going to read you the story of Dimetrodon. And I want to mention something. If you are interested in hearing this poem set to music and performed by myself and Dr. Bob, simply go back to episode number 9, where we perform the Dimetrodon song. So you can hear it today being recited, and then you can listen to the song as it was recorded. The Dimetrodon's Tale. Tale spelled T-A-L-E, not T-A-I-L. You know the difference? Tale, T-A-L-E, story, T-A-I-L, that thing that comes off your booty. So this is the Dimetrodon's story, the Dimetrodon's Tale. Dimetrodon had a tall sail on its back. Don't know if its color was red, green, or black. This back sail stood straight up. It never would fold. It must have been quite a cool sight to behold. It probably helped him a lot when the sun rose up in the morn and his sleeping was done. He needed to warm up and go find some food, because as predators go, this was one hungry dude. Now, it could have been there to avoid an attack from other big meat eaters out for a snack. Perhaps it was meant to attract a new mate. Whatever it was, we can just speculate. Now, this fellow had 2 different kinds of teeth in his jaw. The one kind could stab and the other could gnaw, so we can construe that he chewed food for his gizzard, which makes him much different than your average lizard. A lizard can only take bites and then swallow. They gulp one chunk down, then another would follow. Dimetrodon's teeth put all lizards to shame, which is another key fact that has led to his fame. He grew to about 11 feet long, we surmise. His bones tell the story of stature and size. Scientists think he weighed about 500 pounds. We just have to guess if he ever made sounds. But when you dig deeper and learn a bit more, you find that he's not a true blue dinosaur. He really should be classified as a mammal, which makes him linked closer to aardvark and camel. This creature lived long before dinosaurs did. A noteworthy fact about such I don't kid. He once ruled this land with his 3-foot-high sail, and now you all know the Dimetrodon's Tale. Dimetrodon from Dinorific Poetry, Volume 1, written by Mr. Mike, illustrated by Ethan Sgrignoli. So, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Good morning, Sarah. Have a good day. Wanted to let you know that we do this every day, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Facebook, and then we post every video to the Mr. Mike Sgrignoli YouTube page. So please subscribe, and thank you so much for tuning in. We'll do it again tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow for episode 63. 63, can you believe it? 63. And remember, not every dinosaur model is the same. Thanks for watching Dimetrodon.